Is
Okay, so somebody started recording. Okay, great.
Right.
Yes, yeah, I just want to say, just to make sure we're recording, so we're set.
Okay, we're starting now then.
Can we wait 1 or 2 more minutes for
Absolutely.
for folks, and then we'll go ahead and
Your
get started?
show. No problem, your show.
I'm hoping Earl comes in here in about 1 or 2 minutes, but
No problem.
just if you give that, please.
So Bill, I'm gonna let you MC here a little bit. You're
Yeah,
drive the
I like
conversation.
talking.
I
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Yeah. That's why I threw my name in the hat. Is I'll drag this puppy across the line. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Hi, Bill.
Hey, Earl.
Hey,
I
God,
recognize that voice.
I had a hard time getting caught in the crowd coming across here.
How are
Well,
you, man?
I'm doing great. I love your office. You have a great office.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, Albert's got a pretty cool office there too. I think he can see the water if he looks out that window behind.
Yeah,
him.
that's I've pushed into my family vacation here, and I couldn't go outside. It was too bright. I couldn't get a good picture.
We very much appreciate you both coming.
Oh well, this is interesting. Bill and I have now did it a couple of times. We've
Yeah. And we still talk like we just met. I mean, it's just amazing. The number of things we cover is just amazing.
Yeah.
I've spent many a day with Bill talking about all sorts of things. So I know if you talk as much as Bill talks, we have plenty of time covered here.
I don't think I can compete with that.
Anyhow, let me introduce to the rest of the crowd. This is Albert. Now, how do you say your name?
It's Charpentier.
Charpentier.
Yeah. If you're French, it's Charpentier, but I never say that. Charpentier.
Okay. I didn't want to. I'm terrible with names to begin with, and I want to make sure I didn't butcher it.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
it's Albert, and he can say his last name. And
Charpentier.
Bill Hurd. Yeah. And Bill Hurd. And Bill spells his name with B-I-L. It's not a typo. I always have to tell people that as well. Bill
But
is
it's easy to say. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's unique. So that's how you know Bill, because Bill is unique too.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Bill and Albert did an amazing amount of work at Commodore. Albert, basically, did you invent it as well as design it?
Yes.
Okay, the VIC chip for the VIC-20, which I have to, first of all, before I start any further, I want to say thank you, because I got a chance to say thank you to Chuck Peddle as well. The VIC-20, the VIC-20 was my first computer, and that basically got me going on a career that's lasted, 40 years now.
Good for all of us, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for that, it really, I don't know what I would have been doing. And I want to say thank you, because you were instrumental in making that happen. So we all don't always get a chance to do that, but I want to say thank you.
I appreciate that. It was a very fun time in the world at that point. We were inventing stuff, and it was
I can't imagine.
Yeah, it was crazy. So yeah, it's funny. I've heard through the rumor mill that Elon Musk's first computer was a VIC-20.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I've always considered, well, maybe I'll reach out to him and say hello.
Yeah. Did he send you a check? No.
Yeah.
I'm the same way about the guy that did Minecraft. Supposedly a guy that did Minecraft started on 128. And I'm like, did he ever? I never got the check. Yeah,
Well, and so Albert went through the Commodore 64, and Bill pretty much picked up right after the Commodore 64 and went all the way through the Commodore 128, plus some other things, which hopefully Bill will be able to show us some today. He's got some interesting things as well. And so they pretty much covered the whole lifetime of personal computers at Commodore, sans the PET. We'll say the PET was just probably a little bit before you.
No, actually, I was there for the PET as well.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I have a chiclet PET.
Yeah.
I hope you didn't design the keyboard, because I would say, oh my gosh, it has the worst keyboard of any computer I know.
Oh, absolutely. I've got the whole story on that too.
Okay.
That was a riot back then. Oh.
Okay. So anyhow, so they covered that thing, and so today we're going to have kind of a informal question and answer and discussion with Bill and Albert. So if you had that Commodore question you've always thought about, like, why did they do this? Why are the arrow keys arranged the way they are? That's one of my questions.
now's the time. Yeah.
Yeah, now's the time to ask that question, or tell them it was a really horrible design and you should have done something different. Anyhow, I also want to know, have you kept up with the modern things that are happening with the Commodores and from the VICs to the 64s? That was one of my main questions I want to ask, because it's amazing to me that these computers, 40 years on, people are still using them.
Yeah.
making modern parts for them. There's an infamous getting new keycaps for Commodore 64 is infamously bad in Kickstarter and Indiegogo, but that's another story as well.
Well, I do know that I guess when we were at the other VCF, that somebody did a complete rework with FPGAs and such of the Commodore 64.
Yep.
And it was incredible. I mean, it was a complete rework with modern technology to redo what it did in the same package. So I was surprised. And I asked the person there who, and there were a number of students there. And what was the interesting answer is that, gee, the Commodore 64 was one of the first a fully functional computer that everyone could understand. And you could actually reverse engineer it and get into the details and really understand how a computer worked and operationally without having to have, to get into the depth of an Intel Microsoft world. And so it's a good training tool that a lot of people are still using to be able to learn the fundamentals. So I thought that was an interesting aspect to it.
Well, actually, I will tell you, somebody actually scanned the PCBs in Britain or UK, and I am actually in the process of rebuilding a Commodore 64 from a new PCB. So people are even doing that because I got some new cases as well because somebody found 64C molds and generated new cases. So I'm gonna have a red 64 with a red PCB.
Oh, wow.
Are you going to put a new power supply on it, or are you going to use a 40-year-old Commodore 64 supply?
No, I actually found somebody in Midwest that actually cuts open the old ones and puts a nice power supply in it, puts it back in it, but at least it looks right. No, I've learned enough about that. Why did you design a power supply, whoever designed it, so that when it fails high? You guys have everybody thinks when a power supply dies, it just loses power, except the Commodores. You guys are the only ones that had that problem.
It happened to be the failure mode of the linear chip, that the linear
transistor. It's a transistor in there, right?
It broke that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was myself and a few other people were responsible for that mess.
Okay.
I look at it like we were too cheap to give somebody else money for an LM340. So you guys did your own one because you could probably save, I'm assuming, 80 cents on the power supply.
Oh, yeah, even less than that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, which is still millions of dollars. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I remember with Jack Tramiel, we were going over the bill of materials. This is how,
Jack's going over the bill.
It was going over the bill of materials, and he was giving me grief about literally, and it was a 10-cent part. And that, why did I choose this 10-cent part over this one?
Right.
And he said, if you don't want those million dimes, I'll take them.
I live by that.
And it was funny. The only way I could convince him is I took him out to the lab and I put the 10-cent, the cheaper part in, because it was part of the modulator for the RF and for the video, and the picture wasn't as good.
Is it a ferrite or something that you had?
No, I forget the component off the top of my head.
Right.
I don't really remember, but I do remember him giving me grief over the 10 cents.
Which was our culture. I'm a child of that culture to this day.
And he basically he begrudgingly walked away and okay, we'll spend the 10 cents.
Right.
Now,
and for every dime I spent, I'd find a dime somewhere else. That was
if you think about it, rule. We sold 30 million units, so it's 30 million dimes. That's a lot of dimes.
That's a lot. I should have, no. So Commodore was not the kind of place that played a royalty, at least during my time, royalty to the engineers. But a dime per unit would have been nice. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons I left, because I cut a deal like that with Jack and he refused to pay me.
Wow.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to ask, so on the Commodore 64 and the VIC, there's a number of different revisions of the PCB. And, they have different names now. I don't know what people, aside from the red bin and the others, that they're literally different sizes. And some of the picture versions of the books that have come out, like the VIC 20, the pictorial guide, I don't know if you've seen that. They had these different sizes. Were those for cost reduction purposes, or was it done?
Yeah, it was generally for production efficiency, I'll call it. I mean, and there may have been better parts that were a little less expensive as the revisions came back, or even availability. So functionally, I don't think anything really changed that much. I mean, it was really about, because it moved, there was manufacturing in California, then it moved to Japan. And each of those facilities had different capabilities at that time. So you would redesign it in order to be able to take advantage of that and optimize their production efficiency.
Okay, yeah, because everybody, we've seen it, and a lot of people question, well, why are there like 5 versions of this board? And
Right.
And
So
it didn't look
this-
like there was a big chip count difference. That's why I was kind of wondering.
Well, the CR version done by Kachiyama, you know, he put a hybrid in there and he pulled in as many chips, but then the second earning is always that reduction of PC board. You know, that's his reward, is he gets to chop off 1.5 inches off the front of the board, get another one per panel, and he's a hero. Just
Right.
outright.
Yeah, you just save some dimes.
Yeah, lots of dimes. Well,
Now-
we went to back in the day, we used solder would be on all the PC boards. Everything was
Wave solder?
it was before you even put the parts on the board. There was already a layer of solder there, and I can't remember what we called it. Albert, if you remember. And then Commodore in Japan came up with this idea of not using all that
Well, I mean-
solder. We went to no solder under the solder mask. It used to be everything was soldered and then a solder mask down. That's where you got all the wrinkly solder masks and stuff.
Ah, okay.
So we were saving probably 1/10 of an ounce of solder from that board, not taking the solder with it every time it went out the back. So we literally helped engineer, and this was a time when through holes were actual things that got inserted into the boards, and we're like, no, let's plate the inside of the boards. We'll save a dime, right? And so we were literally on the forefront of a lot of the assembly processes that we take for granted these days. But it was the 80s, you know, that stuff hadn't been done yet.
Well, one of the things I've used and told people about, like Apple has really, they've taken the whole
Who?
production line. Apple.
Oh, okay, them.
Right. Well, because they own the whole production process. I mean, I use this just because, and I really feel like you guys pioneered that. You had the chip manufacturer when you bought Moss, right? You had all the fabrication of all the metal work and everything else. You had the whole vertical that you own. And I know that Jack had gotten burned on it earlier with the TI and the calculators, right, and the chips. So you guys have gone to that. Have you guys ever, you know, has anybody approached you or discussed with you how that came about? And was it just Jack driving that, or, you know, how much efficiency you think you got from that?
Well, it's almost like anything that happens in this era. It's a series of steps and somewhat, I'll call it serendipity that happens. Okay, so what happened with TI and Commodore was that let me just paint the real quick history here. Okay, so MOS Technology, I joined them in '74. Okay, and Chuck Peddle wasn't there yet, and we were doing calculator chips. And so I was actually doing calculator chip design, working in that, but in product engineering. I was just a guy out of school at the time, so I was getting my feet wet. In '75, Chuck Peddle came from Motorola, and he convinced the founders of MOS to go ahead and do the 6502. At what happened though, the 6502 obviously didn't catch on as quickly as it could. And Alan Bradley, who was the resistor manufacturer at the time, they got cold feet and decided not to put any more money into MOS technology. So Commodore, by that time, we were one of the major suppliers, I think the supplier of the Commodore calculator chips, and Commodore was really selling a lot of calculators in the European market. So Jack actually bought MOS, not because of the 6502, but because of supply of calculator chips. Right. So he wanted to have that vertical at that point.
Right, because that's where wasn't it that he had got burned, that TI stopped supplying chips for?
Correct, because TI had entered the calculator market as an end product.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what I'd heard, that they said they were cutting off the supply to Commodore, and he kind of got all his panties in a bunch. Said,
exactly. So that was the impetus there. And so, as it turns out, Commodore then had this 6502 sitting in the background that when Commodore bought when Commodore bought MMS Technology, Chuck Peddle moved to California so he could get into Jack's ear and say, okay, we want to do the PET. Okay, because the PET was really driven by Chuck Peddle. Okay.
Right.
So the software team and the architecture team was out in California doing the PET. We were still doing the chips and hardware design in Valley Forge, okay, Starstown. So that's how that kind of came together. And then in the process, they put a manufacturing facility in California to do PCBs, again for calculators, and then obviously for the PETs. But then also Jack was enamored with Japan because of the quality levels that they were achieving, and he wanted to set up a facility in Japan. So that's eventually where VIC-20s and the Commodore products were, the 64 was produced in Japan, okay? Because they set that up.
Right,
That to
but
me is genius, but that move right there to say Japan manufacturing, in my humble opinion.
Now, but the metal work for this, from what I understood, was like for the PET, it came from the Commodore desks and file cabinets and all the company, or at least
Commodore Toronto or whatever.
Yeah, because one of the guy who runs Midwest has a Commodore file cabinet.
Yes, he does. Jason?
Jason's seen it, and there's a file cabinet. And I think at one point he had a desk too. But from what I understood, that also factored into it because Jack would use what he had, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, he definitely was a proponent of doing things in-house if you could, because theoretically you're saving the margin. You really have to watch. I mean, obviously, what we know now is you have to watch that because of the fact that it's so easy internally. You're so focused on what you can do internally, and if something external happens, you're not necessarily in a position to take advantage of it. So it's a fine line in terms of how high and how far you go with vertical integration. But Jack was because he got burnt by TI, he really was, that was his thing.
I'm just surprised that, you guys aren't the case study for doing that. Apple's kind of taken a lot of that credit, but you guys really had pioneered that. And I mean, in terms, I don't know any other computer company that had from end to end.
No, but I mean, they're very rare now these days. I mean, obviously, Intel's gone a little further in that they make a motherboard, but they never put it in a box. Okay. Yeah, Apple was, but in the early days of Apple, it was not integrated. I mean, they had all of those things, and it was just as they grew, it became it became necessary because of the volumes it was very difficult to find companies that could do the kind of volumes that you needed to have done.
Yeah, I just think you guys should get more credit for that because
So do we.
Yeah. So anyhow, and before I go too much further, I brought Bill as an author recently of a book called Back into the Storm with Margaret
Morabito.
Thank you. And this is how I know Bill. See, it's actually signed on top of it. So Bill was nice enough to send me a copy. It's a good book. It's got some pictures. Has a picture of Bill without a shirt early in the 70s. I don't know if I needed that picture, but otherwise.
Well, that's a picture of Dave DiOrio is why that's in there.
I know it's in there. But anyhow, so if you're interested, by the way, good book. Wanted to mention it, at least tell you that it's out there. You can get it on Amazon. It's a lot of good stories from Bill, as you can hear now. There's more stories in here. Okay, want to make sure I didn't forget that for you, Bill.
Oh, appreciate it. Yeah, because because I'm a co-author, I don't think to mention it, but then I owe it to the co-author to mention it. So thank you for that. We need to get Albert to write a book. We need to get all of this stuff down. And
I was going to say, Albert, are you working on a book? That was one of my questions.
Well, no, I mean, I've always thought about it, but it seems way too much work.
Have you been interviewed by, and I'm trying to think of the guy's name, I think is it Brian or something? He's put out a whole series.
Bagnall?
Yeah, on Commodore. Has he interviewed you for a lot of the books? No. If not, Bill, you should connect him with Bagnall, because Bagnall might write it for you.
And that was the problem, was nobody knew how to get hold of Albert all these years until suddenly he surfaced. And even in my book, you'll see the C64 is just kind of, I mentioned something Yash said, and that's it, because I didn't know the story. And so now I do, and I really would like Albert to get his story out there. That'd be very cool. That's why we're doing this today.
Yeah, but that.
Yeah, I've never been much for publicity or self-promotion. I've always
Right.
always enjoyed just building companies. That was my thing.
And I still feel like the front man for Commodore, at least
Yeah,
for
you
the
definitely
animals.
pushed
Yeah.
it out there, I must say.
Yes, I do.
But definitely, Albert, you should get with Brian, and he's done a great job with the books, and I know.
What is his background? I mean,
He was just a writer, I believe, and somehow he got excited about this. Recently, they
Okay.
just did a Kickstarter, and what was funny is that they got caught during the COVID, but they had to get into the archives in Canada, and he raised money to get the pages scanned, and they're coming up with corporate notes and really early stuff from Commodore. The new one coming out, they've been at it for a couple of years now. This one's taken longer. But
okay. The name was familiar. That's all. I probably have come across him in some of his other writings.
Yeah, but the books are really good. He covers, from Jack
On the edge.
getting the one that what he's working on now is literally Jack coming off the boat all the way across. So it's a nice series, and definitely would like to get this information, recorded. That's why we do these things as well.
Right.
Yeah, this is fun. I mean,
Yeah.
Bill has kind of got me corralled into this stuff.
But we really appreciate you having spent.
Yeah, it's interesting now because you go back and it was fun when I was doing it, and you don't realize when you're doing it the kind of impact that it can have.
Right.
And you just go along with it and you try to create something. I've always told the story about why I got into what I got into, and I'll reiterate this one.
Yeah.
When I was 6 or 7 years old, I didn't sleep well, never did. And I got up in the morning and there was this test pattern on the TV set when I turned it on about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And it hit me like how did that get there? I mean, here's a TV set with the rabbit ears, and how did the picture get there?
Information.
So I decided that, I wanted to learn how to do how'd that work. And I became an electrical engineer in order to learn how a TV set worked. So literally that's what my background hobby was. So, and then I met a guy who was doing chip design for Commodore when I was at school at Penn. And then he told me what he was doing for a living. And I went, oh, that's cool. So I took the last 2 years of my work at semiconductor physics and design.
Wow.
And I got a job when I left school. And then then I learned product engineering, and then I did memory design, ROMs and RAMs. And then when Commodore took over MOS, a lot of the guys who were running it left. And literally it was me and a few other engineers. And I went at one meeting, I went into the Commodore folks, Jack Tramiel, and I said, I'd like to do a video chip.
Yes.
And nobody else knew what to do anyway. They said, sure, do it. So I built but they wouldn't let me do a chip. I had to do a PC board. Literally, it was about 15 by 15 inches full of TTL to simulate what the VIC-20 would do, along with the modulator and the color and everything. So I had to prove to them that I really did know how to control a TV set. And then they went, oh, okay, you can do a chip. And that became the VIC-20. So now there's another background story here after that. So we tried to sell the VIC-20 to game companies like Atari and Mattel. Nobody wanted to touch it, the VIC chip. So there's a guy who I hired out of Villanova University called Bob Yanis.
Bob Yanis.
Right. And Bob was at Commodore as well with me, and he did the audio parts. But he saw the VIC-20 simulator, or development system that I had, which was just a PC and the VIC chip. A processor and a VIC chip, and he said, "Hell, can I do my senior project on that?" I said, "Sure, take it." So he did his Villanova. He was at Villanova, and he did a senior project on that. So he now comes to work after the project, and he starts working full time. Jack Tramiel comes in a few months later. Myself, Charlie Winterbull, and Bob present this senior project to Jack, showing him that it control a TV set and how it works. And Bob had put in a real rudimentary little basic editor in there, and Jack Tramiel went, I want that. And him and Chuck Peddle fought like tooth and nail. Chuck didn't want to do it because Chuck didn't believe in the consumer product category. He really liked the business category. But Jack Tramiel forced him to do it. And that is how the VIC-20 came to be. That's the whole background story on that.
And the thing that amazes me is what Albert said. He built a VIC chip on a printed circuit board.
Yeah.
No,
It-
but I'm impressed because Bill told me pretty much your design translated directly to the chip. I am just,
It did.
and
Yeah.
I am shocked because when I heard that, I was incredibly impressed because the timings from a PCB to a chip, it's such a, if you know the engineering, it's
Yeah.
such a big spread.
Yeah.
That if it made the translation and you didn't have to redesign it for that, I was just like, man, you did a
Well,
great job.
fortunately, I was only doing a one-off.
Right.
Yeah. But still, even though it's slow clock speeds and the other,
Yeah.
that's very impressive. I was
Yeah.
like, wow.
Yeah,
I
it
understood how to work with it.
was a real challenge. It took me about, it probably took me 4 or 5 months to get it to work. And then I could still remember that like one even 11 o'clock at night or something, I got it to work. And the next day I brought all the execs in and go, see, it works. And
Wasn't
I
that
never
the
turned it
color?
on again. That was it.
Wasn't that the color you got to work at the last minute?
Yes, I couldn't get color to work and they wouldn't let me do it unless I could get color because that's what I supposed to do. And then
Which was the important thing.
finally I got the color modulation scheme to work. And then that was like, oh, okay, I guess you really do know what you're doing.
Well, from 6 years old, you achieved your goal of making a TV.
Yeah, and it was really, it was really fun. I mean, it was what I wanted to do. I just said, oh, I want to control a TV set. And then I did it. And it was really a fun thing. And then, see, that was what I was thinking. If I ever wrote a book, there's my intro.
Yeah.
Right, right.
I wanted to make a TV and I did it. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, one of the questions I had, because some people have asked this, we find and stumble across a lot of rare items that have come out of places. And one of the things we wanted to ask you guys, this was a question some people asked about, what fell into your pocket when you left Commodore that you've kept as a keepsake, or it's somehow something important? Like, we see some 6501s every once in a while pop up, which we heard the story. I talked to Jack about, I mean, not Jack, Chuck about that, what had happened. And so those are incredibly rare when you find, 6501. But is there anything particular, like, boy, I wish I had kept the first VIC chip, or I do have the first VIC chip. It's here in this acrylic thing, on my desk. We're curious, what made it out of Commodore with you, and then also, what do you wish you had made out with Commodore?
Well, I'll go first, Bill, and then you can.
Yeah.
I mean, so I wish I had kept the original prototype Commodore 64s that we built for the first CES show in January.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, again, you don't know.
You don't. We had piles of those kind of keepsakes, and one day we threw them all out of the lab.
Yeah,
We
and
probably
it
threw away your.
And we all go like this here. We all just go,
Yeah.
oh.
I mean, and it was bad. I mean, it was like my heart and soul were in that prototype, and who knows what was going to happen, whether the people would like it at CES or people would go, who cares? And so it would have been nice to have that, because that would have been like the first one we built and so forth. And then to me, that was sort of the highlight of what I had done. And after that, it was like, okay. And that's, Jack and I didn't see eye to eye from that point on. And he by August, I had made a decision to leave, because I had said I wanted to do basically a Commodore 80. And this is where Bill gets involved, and the story moves forward with Bill. And he wouldn't let me do it. I mean, he just said, right.
We're just like, I can't believe the opportunity that was there that got missed.
Oh yeah, it was just incredible, and it's sad, and it just, I never understood why he wouldn't let me do it, and he just said, no, we're not going to do that. I'm going to do what at the time was called the +4, but that then morphed, and then I'm going to hand it over to Bill, and Bill can go through with his.
No, but what did you bring home with you? What do you have?
Oh, I have 2 pieces. One I can actually show you. I brought with me. I have a 6502 poster of the original mask set.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
MOS 6502. Okay. So I still have that hanging on my wall in my office. I have this one I'm going to show you. I don't know if you can see this too.
Yeah,
well.
we can see it.
Yeah.
You can see the picture of my light in there.
Wow.
But what this is a pen plot of the original 65, 67 chip, Rev 0.
Oh,
The
wow.
first one ever made.
I
And
can
it-
see the sprite. I can see the sprite memories.
Yeah, the sprite memory. It's on this side, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, this is actually the pen plot of all the transistors and all the interconnect of the entire chip. And it's
Wow.
one of a kind that was the big memorabilia piece that I took. That and the original print of the 6502.
Very cool. Okay. Cool.
How many transistors are in a VIC chip?
It's about 12,000. It was
Which is
quite a bit
so
more than
low.
6502.
Yeah, I would have guessed like a couple 100,000 just because my memory's so bad, right? And it's like,
no, it was
that
it was like
15,
4 times the 6502. 6502 was only about 4,000 transistors. This was about 12,000. And a lot of it was because of the fact that it had a lot of one-chip memory that I had to store the
Right.
lines worth of data and the
Data, yeah.
sprites. So a lot of it was function of that. Yeah.
Right, right.
So Bill, what, same question to you, Bill.
Well, I'm not going to answer it the way you want. What I wish we had taken more of back then were pictures. There
Ah,
are no frickin' pictures except for me without my shirt on,
right.
you know, with Dave DiOrio. And you know, and I see books like something in the Valley, you know, History in the Valley and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm like, what are these guys running around with just cameras strapped around their necks while they're working? I mean, we were busy. We didn't take pictures. It was the
Good
East
point.
Coast. It's like,
Yeah. No, I have like 2 pictures from my work when I worked at like the Cape. And yeah, it's like, you don't think about bringing a camera to
Yeah.
work.
No, it just doesn't dawn on you that what you're doing is going to be memorable.
Right.
Going to work every day, you know. And
right.
I enjoyed the heck out of what I was doing, but we're just doing it. It's just
Well,
making
yeah,
it
you know, I stumbled on it. I was working at Cape Kennedy when the Challenger exploded. And I have pictures of it. And it only was because a friend had just gotten a new camera for Christmas and a new lens on it. And he wanted to get some space pictures. And I said, okay, I'll take it over for the next launch. Otherwise, you know, it just, again, serendipity, dumb luck that you happen to be there and taking pictures when it happened. But yeah, I mean, normally you don't bring a camera to work, right? It's not.
And I was sitting in my office when the Challenger exploded, and I walked into the lab where we had TV sets, and I turned it on, and people started to get. I got goosebumps now because I know right where I was that moment in time when.
Oh
they
yeah.
described. Yeah.
So, okay, so you didn't have pictures, but what did you bring, Bill? What did you
I
sneak
didn't
out?
take, you know, Adam Schwanier signed me out a box of stuff, and it says right on the slip, trash, right? And in there is like a Commodore 128 prototype. I got little stuff like, this saved CES of 85. This is the 80 column phase lock loop tower that taught the chip to be normal again, you know, after it was insane. You know, but it's all in my memories. I don't have much stuff. And I wish I did. I'd be rich if I just had the contents of my desk, you know, and waited 20 years and eBay. Yeah, I'd be rich.
But I thought you had a model to show us, perhaps.
Oh, a pile of stuff. You mean like if you start with stuff like this, right? Kim
Yeah.
ones, which we didn't
Oh,
talk
Kim
about.
Wong, yeah.
Yeah.
C116s. So I didn't take these from Commodore though. These have been given to me over the years. We were talking about this before the show, a Commodore 64. See all this blank space here?
Yeah.
This is something. This is Albert and I were talking about this. That was full of stuff. For Albert to get this to work the first time, there was all circuitry in here. And then as we got better at it, we condensed it into chips and stuff. So every one of these is a story about time slices and stuff. So, but no, I don't, you know, all my stuff, I do have the C128 prototype I could pull out, but y'all have seen that. It's just, you look at it and there's 200 wires on it and you say, how did it ever work? And the answer was, we were young. We sat there and made every single wire work, every function work. If a wire got torn off, we put it back on, you know. Nowadays, if a wire gets torn off, they find me in the closet sitting there crying, you know, because it's like, oh, the wire fell off it. So, yeah, so I really don't. Just corrupted memories from the 80s.
Well,
Yeah,
do
that's it. Yeah.
Do your prototypes still work there, Bill?
Oh, I got an LCD prototype. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I do have an LCD. That's true. That was in the pile of stuff called trash. And I fired up the Commodore LCD. It had 4 or 5 things broken with it that I had to fix, because once you're in for a penny, in for a pound, I had to fix bad connectors, just everything, minus 12 volts. And finally, I got it to work, except for one pin on one custom chip is popped. And Albert knows what I mean by a popped output pin. Right? The thing just goes, oh, I kind of know what I want to do, but you're really seeing the pre-driver stuff. You're not seeing the drivers. So it mostly works, except for those silly custom chips that gave us life.
Well, tell them about that one, because that's one machine that not a lot of people even know about.
So the Commodore LCD machine was after TED, which is what we call the +4 series. Commodore had gone and bought in their own LCD company, probably in hindsight. I didn't know this at the time, but they probably bought it for the calculator business. But we owned an LCD. We were the only American glass manufacturers of LCD glass. And Jack Trammell, right? How do you leverage that? So we were going to come up with a thing called a portable computer that was battery powered and ran off an LCD in the 1980s. And it was going to be evolutionary, not, so we did, I started on the 128 and on the LCD, and I jumped to the 128. Jeff Porter took over the LCD, and we went in parallel, thinking both are going to get made. And at the last minute, a guy named Marshall Smith says, no, we're not going to make the LCD computer. And I'll tell you, this is probably one of the sadder things for me. If it were up to me, we would have made an LCD computer instead of a C128. Because the LCD was evolutionary. The C128 was just another whack at the pinata, So
do you have that there so you could show people?
It's put away.
Okay.
I think. Yeah, if I pull it out, I'll probably break that wire I was talking about.
Okay. But so how close to get close to being done? I mean, people don't know how many of those exist. Is it 2?
3 that we know of.
Okay.
3 that, and Jeff Porter has the other 2, and he never took the batteries out of it, so the batteries have leaked all over the inside, and he knows that, and he still hadn't taken the batteries out. Why? Because we saw it work 40 years ago. We don't need to know it works today.
Everybody else would like to see it work.
So I know.
How close was it to being done?
It was done. I mean, it was not done, but it had full basic, full memory manager. It had a built-in 1541 disk emulator where you can store and read and write. It says it right on the screen when I brought it up. You can look at a directory of a static RAM that emulated a 1541. Wow. So it was done. I mean, done, but not done. So it had a full basic, had an editor, had a thing called we didn't call it a spreadsheet. We didn't know what to call it, but it's what they called VisiCalc back then.
Okay. Was it like the +4 with the built-in apps sort of thing?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's one of those things now you look at. There's a couple things, I mean, and you see this in the Commodore books, that had Commodore made just like 3 different zigs instead of a zag,
right, right,
they would have blown by Apple and everybody else.
Oh yeah,
and still exists today. If Jack had not pissed off a number of engineers.
Well, it was a function of the fact that Jack he was driven by marketing and manufacturing, and they were the 2 things he understood. Engineering was this, these other guys
in the middle,
stuff. And as Commodore grew, it did hire more engineers, but also too, the marketing department got stronger, and he was comfortable. He understood that. And so a lot of the times that where engineers at the time in the 80s were certainly driving, even today, we're driving technology and vision, marketing folks weren't as visionary. I mean, that's just reality, from my opinion. And so there was a lot of driven there, that there's a lot of things that they would go, we would want to go X and they would want to go Y. And you mentioned the +4, and that was actually the major debate that Jack and I had after the Commodore 64. When I wanted to do the Commodore 80, he wanted to do the +4. And the reason why is because in the marketing team, they said, well, what's a computer? It's just it's a big calculator. It has apps in it, and you got a spreadsheet, and you got a word processor, and you got a PowerPoint. What more do you need? And he actually said that to me.
Right.
What more do you need?
Right.
So It
Had
was
he
just,
realized the game market, how big the game market was back then? I mean, there's
well,
quite a bit of
yeah,
work.
he did. And that's why I mean, I love video games, and that's why the Commodore products had ports on them to do that, and the chips designed to do that. So I had a joystick.
I wanted
by
to
the
play
way.
a game. so
It had a joystick because I love playing games. So really, but no, he didn't appreciate the market, and he felt that Atari had that. I mean, that was their angle. Okay. So, and also too, at the time, Chuck was in his ear about, well, consumer computers weren't really where it was at. So there was a lot of noise, and in that time, that era, there was a lot of noise. Nobody knew where things were going to go, and
No
he shot, and that was his decision.
Do you
Right.
think if the Irvings had been replaced with somebody, a better investor that maybe had a little bit more vision, that would have been enough to change it?
Yes, I do think so. I think that if he had come up with somebody who, again, from a more of an engineering background that understood,
As opposed to a lumber background, because I know
Yes.
that when we go to
I'm
Canada,
being nice.
yeah, right. Irving, it's all the gas stations and all the lumber. And you're like,
Right.
how did they get it even connected with,
Right.
Yeah.
Jack and Commodore? And you
Right.
hear some of the stories later, but I was just like, man, that was just odd to me. And I was
Well,
like,
I mean, you can almost, it's like Scully going to Apple.
that's true.
How well
Pepsi.
did that work out?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's just, it's a, round peg in a square hole kind of a thing, and it just didn't work out.
And it would have been nice if, like, Intel or some other company had been willing to invest in you guys. Like I said, I think the world could be completely spun on a different thing.
It was just it was a technology path that just ended up derailing of its own and decision making.
Well, and Jack leaving was as a direct result from the collision of Jack and Irving too,
Yeah.
from what I understand.
Yeah, that's
And-
correct. But my understanding, because Jack left about 2 to 3 years after I did. Okay, I left in 82. He was out in like 85, I guess it was.
85 January 2nd or 3rd, because it was
Yeah.
during the CES show. Yes.
Yeah, and I left August of September of 82.
7th or 8th. Yeah.
Now, we've talked, and this is fun. I always enjoy this, but I want to open up some questions here for people in the room. See if people have other questions that they'd like to ask. Does anybody have a question they'd like to? Yeah, come on up.
Oh, hey. All right, hey, this is Dale Line for Cities In. We got, we're wondering if during the brainstorming process of I'm presuming there was a brainstorming process of the design of the Commodore 64. Were there any features or anything that you guys had come up with that might have got scrapped?
Yes.
Left behind,
Yeah.
fast disk drives. Yeah.
Yeah. There were 3 or 4 that really annoyed about me for a lot of different reasons. Okay. I mean, smooth background screen scrolling, I wanted to do better than it turned out, but we just ran out of time. Okay.
Wow.
So, yeah, we just simply I had to get the chip done. It had to be done by 1st January 82 CES.
Right.
And I just ran out of design time. I couldn't get it done in time. So that's one feature I would have liked to have, because doing a video game, obviously you like to have the background smooth, smooth,
Right.
scroll smoothly by before as part of the background structure. So that was one of the features that went away. In the audio chip that Bob Yanis was working on, it was originally designed as a 4-voice chip, not a 3, and the chip got too big.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, we had to slice one thing off of that, and we had to slice a voice off. Yeah, the chip was just too big. We had a limit of like 220 mils or whatever.
So it's limited by the pads around it. It's or by the frame itself.
Correct. Yes, it was.
Wow.
Well, actually, it was done by just silicon area. We knew the yield we would get for a certain size piece of silicon, and if we went beyond that, the yield really fell off quickly. So we had a limit of the chip, how big a chip could be.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it was just simply, okay, it can't be any bigger than this. And we put the fourth voice on, it was like too big. We just went, whoop, tear that off. It went away, you know? And then the only other, I mean, well, not, that was the only other, they were the two main features that I wished that I would have been able to do. And I wanted to be able to put more sprites in there, but again, chip size is a problem. And the other thing I want to do is make them bigger. But again, memory and I just wanted more because I mean, in the processes of the day, 6502, moving an object around was
horrific.
It couldn't do. So sprites were the real reason for the whole thing to exist. And again, if you look at a video game from the VIC-20 perspective, the VIC-1 chip versus the VIC-2, that was the limitation that I wanted to fix, that moving an object around. So the bigger and the better you can make sprites, or the more of them, the better video game you can make. So they were the things that kind of fell on the table, but there weren't too many. I mean, architecturally, it came out pretty close to what we had originally envisioned.
Didn't you have a fast floppy interface you got told to take off?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that was really a bad one. I'm thinking about that.
Yeah.
I knew that in order to have a reasonable computer system, you needed to have a fast disk drive.
You think? Yeah.
System, right. And unfortunately, so we put a fast disk drive interface onto the thing. So it's very similar to the WAS machine that he put onto the Apple II. I was copying that essentially. We're going to put an Apple type drive onto the Commodore 64. But I got shot down from a marketing perspective. They had, like, I was told, Bill, now you would know this better than I do, but I was told they had a warehouse full of the 1741s or whatever, that 1541s or whatever it was called.
Right,
and
right.
They had to sell these off. And if I would have made a new disk drive interface, they would have been able to sell the warehouse full.
So the 1541 already existed. Oh,
Yes.
1540 already existed.
Yes.
Yes, the VIC-21. Yes, it would have. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they still had to change it. Albert, they still had to change it from a 1540 to a 1541 because of the sprite DMAs.
Yeah. So that was, I mean,
still had to do it.
Really, that bothered me because it really limited what you could do from operating system and update perspective. It was really frustrating, But originally the original design was only going to have 16K of RAM. Yeah, and what happened was in this case, because that was at the time, and a year and a half when we first started the project, it took about a year and a half to do it. The 16K was really the only thing available at the right price. As the project continued, 64K RAMs were coming down in price. And then Jack Tramiel, I still remember the meeting, he came into the meeting and said, I want to put in a 64K of RAM because of the fact that it would be really cachet for the marketing process. And even though a 6502 couldn't access the RAM, all the RAM at the same time, we came up with the bank switching and so forth. So that was a quick fix to be able to get 64K in there. So that was a nice feature. That was on the other side, an add-in that we didn't expect to do, what we were able to do.
Right. That's so cool. That's like the C64 now with 64.
Right. Right. It was a C16. You're welcome.
Right. Yeah, without Albert, without Irving there, the way Commodore ended would certainly have been different. If
I would assume.
Yeah, I'm not saying it'd be better or worse. It'd have been different.
Oh, it would have been different, right? It would have been, who knows, but you can't say.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
And have you checked to see if you have any like old circuit descriptions or diagrams that could be used by the MR project?
Do you know what the MR project is, Albert?
No, I don't.
It's
they took go ahead and explain.
Yeah, it's they implement many old systems in an FPGA, and
all of them.
Yes, as many as
all of the video systems, Ataris, Commodores.
So I don't know. I mean, how accurate their Commodore 64 is, but I mean, if you have like circuit diagrams and such, like they might be able to use them. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, Bill would have them more than I do because
that's a MR.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you haven't like asked them if you have like circuit diagrams that they could use yet?
I don't, because when I left Commodore, I was extremely worried about them suing me. So I literally handed my entire office and the keys to my office to the general manager there. And they still sued me anyway, but.
And same here. I walked out leaving my office. Just here's my office. Everything in it's yours. The only thing I walked out of was a box of junk that had been signed out to me a couple months earlier.
Okay, I mean, you like held up a circuit board, you know, a little while ago, so.
Yeah, and that was from the box of junk, you know, so yeah, so everything I had fit in something this big. Yeah, and it's an accident.
I had a box that's,
yeah,
because, you know, and Jack was really serious about IP, and he was always worried about somebody stealing something from him. So
you know, if there had been Twitter back then, we'd have gotten fired, right? If you Twittered from the lab, you'd be fired. That's the way I look at it. You didn't tell people what you were working on back then. You certainly didn't go on social media and describe your problems. You know?
Yeah. I was surprised that, I mean, I walked away with this, as I showed you earlier. I walked away with this thing. I mean, that was like, that could have been really trouble.
That was just the 6502 though, right? So.
No, this is the VIC chip.
If that's the VIC chip, I mean, somebody could very well be able to use that.
Well, they can do the same thing by decapping a chip too these days.
Yeah, today you do that, but yeah, back then nobody cared. I mean, yeah, you give in, but schematics and stuff would have been really serious.
The juju,
yeah. We don't have any. I don't certainly have any of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your schematic, Albert, was it hand drawn?
Yes.
So that's the other thing.
Hand drawn.
We
didn't have computer systems powerful enough to actually do the computer aided design. We had SPICE as one of the few things, and you'd SPICE some things, but like all digital logic was done by hand. I had a timing diagram that literally was 12 feet long. Wow. Of all the signals in the chip, from the time you would start up to going through a screen, and one whole screen's worth of all the signals that were on there, and hundreds of signals, and timing them out and looking at the logic, and it was done by hand. And then when you were done, you get a plot like I showed you, but it was literally about 10 feet by 10 feet, a pen plot.
Right.
And you crawl around on the floor, making sure all the connections were right.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, it's amazing that it worked. I mean, you think about all the details. Now, you did take some shortcuts. I mean, you basically had a lot of standardization, standard size transistors that you would upscale in certain amounts so you knew how much they would drive. You had standard RAM cells, standard adders, and things like that. So you really tried to keep the variation at a bare minimum so that you wouldn't have to just check everything. I mean, you could check you check the cell that was used for that once, and then it was a step and repeat process that, yes, we did have computer aided step and repeat to make the pen plots. So that was where you would limit the level of checking that you needed to do. You couldn't have done it any other way. So you really had a lot of sense of reducing variation when you were doing the design. Okay. Wish I had some of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, and there's people from Apple. I mean, there's a whole industry selling Apple prototypes. They go for thousands. There's like 200 Apple ones, which I thought the Apple One was a prototype, but if you make 200 or something, it's not a prototype.
No, it wasn't. I was at the CES when Steve Jobs introduced that. Him and I met quite a few times during the early era. Yeah. Him and Waz and myself traded a lot of conversation about things.
Very cool.
Yeah, it was fun.
Hello.
Hi.
Question for both of you guys. From your time at Commodore, what bug caused you to lose the most sleep, most years off your life?
Bill, why don't you go first this time?
Well, it was the 80 column chip on the 128. That's how the whole C128 story started, is back in the days of AOL or whatever that competition was for them. I wrote a story about this 8563 video chip that just went through 6, 7 revs. They just kept missing the boat. It got worse instead of better. And CES is 2 weeks away, and they went on vacation. And we built this little tower. It said, dang it, you're going to work anyways. And it worked, you know. So that was mine. That was where I was going to have to go to jail for beating the crap out of a chip designer if it kept going.
I have two. Well, it wasn't a bug. It was before I was designing the video chips, I was designing RAMs and ROMs, and there's a couple of good stories there. ROM, I did a ROM. I did a 64K ROM, okay, that we were going to use. That was used in the PET and so forth. And Atari,
Also, asteroids, yeah.
yeah, I was going to tell that story about asteroids. So Atari, the old Atari game that was they didn't bring out all the address lines for the cartridge. They only had a 32K address space, but they couldn't fit asteroids, which was a real popular game at the time, and they wanted to bring that out, but they couldn't fit it. So Atari came and said, gee, you guys have a 64K ROM, can you do something to make this work? And I said, yeah, I can put a bank switch in there. So I put a bank switch into the Atari game and into the ROM. And that way, if they hit a certain address, it would look for a certain address to be hit and it would switch over to a different bank. And that way you could get double the space, and they were able to fit the asteroids game in. And we sold a bazillion of those things to Apple, to Atari. So that wasn't a bug, but the fact is that I was then designing a RAM chip that went into the PET, and it was a 4K RAM, big RAM back then, Intel. And,
Right.
And it would fail. I mean, after like 6 months, it would just fail. And I took more grief for my design than I had ever thought possible. It was all my fault that the tests were failing in the field, and Chuck was all over me about it. And so, but I said, how can it be the design? It works for 6 months. It just, the design isn't. So
It has to be
eventually,
physics. Yeah.
eventually they figured out that there was a cleaning step in the fabrication process, and there was a little bit of an overhang in the over the gate, and some crud was getting caught in there.
Get in there.
And it was contaminating and eventually killed the transistor and made a failure, a single bit failure. And it took months to find it, and I was finally vindicated.
Wow. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. And just one other quick one. The original Commodore 64 VIC-2 chip was actually set up to go at 3.5 megahertz color rate across the screen. And there was two problems with that. One is that you can only fit 36 characters, which annoyed me. And number two was that if you put up a 1s and 0 pattern, that would be a color. Now, Apple actually used that to make
Right,
color.
they did.
You couldn't do color the way I wanted it to do color if you left it that way. So I turned around and I said, okay, I'm going to use a 4 megahertz clock frequency. And it turned out that, so I made a quick chip change to change the whole timing level so it could actually do 40 characters a little faster, because it was set up to do 40 characters, but they wouldn't fit on a standard screen. So this shrunk it down to by the 10% allowed me to do 40 characters. We got the chip in, we plugged it in, and there was this fluttering. Bill knows what I'm talking about. Okay? This, like, it was shimmering, it was called. Okay, because what was happening is that the color dot clock and the black and white clock weren't in sync.
Right.
And it would shimmer, they would back, and it was annoying as hell. And I was like really in trouble because this thing had to work. We just showed it at CES, even though it had 36 characters. We were supposed to put it in production, and I made a decision right after CES to make the change, and I didn't tell anybody.
He didn't tell Jack.
Yeah, I didn't tell Jack. I just did. Because I was annoyed. It was my video chip and it didn't work the way I wanted. So anyway, we had to come up with a fix. And fortunately, there was a gentleman there who knew about phase lock loops. And he said, all we have to do is to take the color clock and we'll upshift it with a phase lock loop to 4.1 something. And that way it'll be in sync, lock in phase. And that's that glue that Bill was talking about that doesn't exist anymore on the one board. Now, last piece of that story was TI had a phase lock loop that we had to buy. And TI, we started buying them, and then TI went, oh, Commodore's using this. Oh, that $1 chip, that's now $5.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
So we
That's what
actually
Dell
ended up
would be
having to
hard.
design it out, which is what
Yeah.
Drew was talking about. But that one, Jack was so funny because when I finally had it all running, he brought me into his office. He screams at me, "You could have sunk my whole company, buddy." And my response was, "But I didn't. It worked." What's the problem?
Right. Wow. And it was a phase lock loop. The same thing he's talking about is what fixed the Commodore 128 3-4 years later. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Funny
Yeah,
stuff.
just a funny stuff like that. Anyway, they were the ones that caused me Audrey to Commodore. I've had you can't be an engineer without having a good career.
Right.
Great stories, guys. Thanks.
Yeah, you're
Sure
welcome.
thing.
We're at time. We can take one more. I do that.
So what would happen if you had told Jack, I'm going to replace this dot clock. I'm going to, he wouldn't have let you do
He
it.
would not have let me, which is why I didn't tell him.
Right. He wouldn't have let you do it.
He would have said, "It's good enough."
Right. Right. Right.
Yep. And I was, yep, my call, and I just did it.
His math would have been, how much are we going to make? Ship it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, ship it. Oh, it works good enough.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
I had a question about Commodore Basic. I heard recently that the C64 had Commodore Basic version 2, but at the time Commodore already had developed Commodore Basic version 4 potentially, and it was decided to just put version 2 on the C64. Is that true? And if so, how did that decision get made?
I don't know anything about that.
Okay, I mean, I can only give you the history of that, and that. So there was the basic that was done for the Commodore PET. Okay, and then Bill, what was Bill's name? Bill
Seiler?
Bill Seiler. He was out in Palo Alto with the group that was doing the PET. So when the VIC 20 was designed, he did the software that was taken from the PET and put into the VIC 20. And then when that changed, so when that was that. So I don't know what revision of basic that would have been called. It would have been maybe 2 at the time. And then the PET also had its own trajectory, so it may have had some other basics. The basic that came out into the Commodore 64 was taken from the VIC 20, and then Bob Russell took that work that Bill Seiler had done on the VIC 20 and then turned that into the basic that was used in the Commodore 64. But I don't recall the revisions. I mean, your numbers. I mean, I thought that 2 would have been.
I never heard of 4. Yeah.
Neither did I. I mean, it may have had a name, but that's the actual evolution of that. Okay.
For the TED, we did version 3.5, I think.
Mm. Yeah,
Wasn't it? For the +4, and then it jumped to version 6 for the one. So how they numbered it was beyond me. I who knows the mind of programmers, right? They're like 1, 3, 5, 7. You know, it's like, okay, come on. Just if I did revisions numbers on a chip like that, you all would be up in arms, you know.
Thanks.
Okay.
So, did the PET basic ever come back in? Did you ever, it branched between the PET and the VIC. Did it ever come back together? Like you guys pull an update? Because I know the PET kept going and they're slightly different.
I was after I left in 82.
It's after, yeah.
History
Yeah.
was, yeah. Bill would know. Did, yeah. I don't
Who,
know.
who ran the programmers when you were there, Albert? So there was, as you mentioned, like Bob Russell was there. Oh, what's the other guy's name? Who wrote the kernel? I've forgotten. It was John Fagans.
John Fagans, yes.
Yes. Who else was the software guy around that? Not that many, right?
No, that was basically it was Fagans and Bob Russell that did the whole project on the 64. That was it. I mean, literally, there was a team. There was only a team of 10 people on the Commodore 64. And that was it.
Yeah.
I mean, there was nobody else.
And we did the same work. It was 6 to 8 of us did all the work, and 30 people watched when I was there.
Yeah. We were fortunate there weren't 30 people at the time to watch us.
Oh, we hated it. Yeah, because it was the same core of 10 of us. except now you're walking down the hallway and people are trying to trip you and stuff, you know, that's being helpful.
Well, I think that was one of the reasons I ended up leaving, is because of the fact that I watched Commodore. I mean, literally Commodore, when they bought Almost Technology, was about a 24, $30 million company, if that.
Right.
By the time I left, it was approaching almost $1 billion. It was going
Billion,
to
it hit $1 billion
billion
when I was
sales.
there. Yeah.
And there was just a huge influx of folks that were going to be part of the, marketing efforts, and
It didn't. Yeah.
and they were in the way. And I said, I can do my own thing. So that's what I did.
Yeah.
Well,
But it was, it's part of what companies do for growth. I mean, it happens.
well, I'll save the chiclet keyboard question for a future talk with you, because definitely would love to have you guys come down. By the way, would love to have you come down. If you ever are in the mood or willing to come down here to Georgia, we'll get you down here, and then you can also sit in the table and we can talk for even longer.
Yeah.
This is very much enjoyed.
We demand barbecue.
That's right. Yeah, I got some places.
Okay.
Bill, I took Bill barbecue last time we were here. We had a really good time. So
All right.
thank you so very, very much for
You're
coming
welcome.
and being here. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
Everybody,
Hello.
thank you for contributing, and we'll talk to you guys later. And Bill, I'll get your point to the recording so you guys have a chance. If you want
Excellent.
to-
Fair enough. All right.
All right. Thank
Have
you,
a good day.
Thanks so
everyone.
much. Thank you.
Great talking
Okay,
with
bye.
you, Albert.
Good seeing you.
So long,
Take
Bill.
care, Earl.
See you later.
See you later, Bill. See you later, Albert.
Bye.